In today's show, we're looking ahead to Week 18 for fantasy basketball. Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com and at Yahoo Sports Australia. And you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_Beeble and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. We're here to look at Week 18 in the NBA. Give a bit of a preview. It's the fantasy playoffs, semi-final week, finals week, first round of the playoffs, whatever your setup is. Let's talk about Week 18 in the NBA. Let's start doing it now by looking at how the week plays out. And this is the magical week where we have three teams play 5 games for the week. The Dallas Mavericks, the Oklahoma City Thunder, and the Toronto Raptors all play 5 games this week. That is huge. 22 teams play 4 games. And then the Warriors, Pacers, Pistons, Knicks, and Clippers play 3 games for the week. Now, of course, everything isn't always as it seems. That's great, but is Luka Doncic and Kristaps Porzingis going to play 5 games? No way. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's not even a part of the Thunder, so if you plan for that, then bad luck. Well, not a part of the Thunder because he's injured. The Raptors, Kyle Lowry going to play 5? Get out of here. 3 games for him. 3 games for Van Vliet. 3 games for Anunoby. Maybe 4 games for Siakam. Probably 3 games for Siakam. Chris Boucher is not even going to play. And that is why I highly recommend against putting huge amounts of stock into playoff schedule when making trades and when drafting. Sure, waiver wire pickups, by all means, do it. But, oh, look at that. You know, I made a trade for Lowry for my 5-game week in the playoffs. Did you think the Raptors would just be sitting everyone every game at that point? No. I grabbed Shai, and that was before he was injured. 5-game week in the playoffs. Let's go. And he's not here. It just never works out that way. It just really doesn't. Attacking the waiver wire for 5-game weeks, sure, absolutely. There's great value in that. We've got heaps of guys we can add. But it's not the panacea and the, well, mate, got to draft him. Can't have the shit schedules, got to have the good schedules. It doesn't work that way. It just isn't as simple as that. It's not the be-all and end-all. Sure, it's a factor. It's usually a pretty small factor, though, when you're making decisions months before we actually get to this stage in the season. So when we look at how this all plays out, it is going to be important to look at those 5-game teams, but we aren't going to get the value that we may have hoped or that you may have, on the surface, that it would view to get some of those blokes in from some of those teams. As I said, the Warriors, Pacers, Pistons, Knicks, Clippers, only the 3 games for this week. And that's not ideal when 25 teams play at least 4 games. So you're going to have a lot of guys that you're sitting. Some hot pickups that you've had from the Pacers, O'Shea Brissett perhaps. Maybe it's Isaiah Stewart, Alf. Maybe it's Killian Hayes. Maybe it's Emmanuel Quickley, Reggie Jackson, Terrence Mann, Ivica Zubac. Maybe they're not the options that we have to go with this week on a everyday basis. And we'll talk more about how the schedule breaks down. Working out when the schedule is, how the games are played, when the games are played and how many games are played is one of the key things when you're at this point in the season. So let's have a look at how the week breaks down. 11 games on Monday, big Monday. 6 games on Tuesday, 10 on Wednesday, 6 on Thursday, 8 Friday, 10 Saturday, 8 Sunday. So our streaming days are Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday. They're the days that we most likely have got an open roster spot, active open roster spot where we can add someone off the wire and play them. If you add someone for Monday, you're probably not going to get to play them. Same for Wednesday, same for Saturday. With minimum 10 games on those 3 days, whoever you add on that day probably just sits on your bench. Most likely. Unless you're in a scenario where that guy that you added has just got like massive top 80 value and he just supplants one of your 10 better players and you just happen to fortuitously find that bloke on the waiver wire. So, streaming. Interestingly, the best stream teams are not the 5-game teams. The Milwaukee Bucks and the Brooklyn Nets, all 4 of their games take place on Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Sunday. That's better than the 5-game teams. So, if you add a Jalen Brunson, Moses Brown, Tony Bradley, Alexei Pokusevski, Kem Birch might have less value than a Bobby Portis, DeAndre Jordan, Joe Harris, Bruce Brown, because you'll be able to use those Nets and Bucks players 4 times, whereas for your Brunsons and Cooley Steins and Birches, you might only actually activate them 3 times for the week. So while on the surface, a 5-game week looks so sexy, mate, Chris Boucher's down, Kem Birch is starting, 5 games for the week, that's super important for a weekly changes league, but for a daily changes league, you probably only use him 3 times. So then his value goes back to being the same as a guy from maybe the Clippers. So before you look and go, well, I'll drop Reggie Jackson because he's got 3 games, and I add Kem Birch because he's got 5. Is that actually what happens? It probably isn't, yeah? So just have a look at that. The Mavericks, the Thunder, the Raptors, the Celtics, the Rockets, and the Blazers all play 3 quality games this week, while there's a bunch of teams with 1. So be wary of this. The Cavs, Grizzlies, Heat, Jazz, Pelicans, Nuggets, Magic, Bulls, Wizards, Hawks, Pistons, and Knicks all play 1 game only on the low volume days. The Clippers play 0. Now, I used the Reggie Jackson example earlier. I think if you had Reggie Jackson, his 3 games, you'd probably use him with his level of play. He'd probably be a top 10 guy on your team. So that's why I use that. But as say you decided you wanted to stream Terrence Mann, or you wanted to stream in Rajon Rondo for his assists, or you were looking at Zubats, even, who's a sort of a back-end guy. You have them and you might use them 0 times this week. And that is more harmful than the 3-game only week for the playoffs. Back-to-backs. 26 teams have a back-to-back this week. The Mavericks, the Grizzlies, the Magic, the Blazers, the Wizards, the Hawks, the Thunder, the Raptors, the Cavs, and the Hornets have 2. Super important for those 5-game teams, obviously. The Raptors resting blokes. The Mavericks will rest blokes. The Blazers with 2. Does that really nerf what Yusuf Nurkic does this week? Does he only play 2 games? I think it's a possibility. But one of the Blazers back-to-backs is one of those ones that leads out of the week. It's the Sunday, Monday at the end of the week. So maybe you get 3 Yusuf Nurkic games, which, after his performance on Friday, you're pretty bloody excited about. They're probably the major rest risks there out of that group. Kevin Love's been playing his back-to-backs. Charlotte doesn't have too many worries there at all. The Pistons, who've had one of the biggest back-to-back issues, don't have one. So Mason Plumlee, Corey Joseph, Jeremy Grant, they're not having the back-to-back rest. Now, do they still rest those guys? But with only 3 games on, if Joseph is going to eat into Hayes' time, if Plumlee's going to continue to play over Alf Stewart, and there's no back-to-back, so not even a big chance of big minutes for those guys during the week, it does become worrisome. And the Clippers, as I said, have no back-to-backs either. But that's good news, because Paul George may have been, and Reggie Jackson and Marcus Morris, they may have been a risk at sitting during the week on a back-to-back. But hopefully you get full use out of those blokes. Back-to-back streaming. Tuesday, Thursday, we start off with Dallas, OKC, and Toronto, Milwaukee, and Brooklyn, Houston, Minnesota, Golden State, and Indiana. You can add a player on those days. Now, obviously, if you add a Milwaukee or Brooklyn player on Tuesday, you add them. They play Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday, 4 games. So they're the obvious ones to add there. But those other guys, you can get that Tuesday, Thursday. The only team with a Thursday, Friday back-to-back is the Bucks and the Nets. And then Friday, Sunday, it's the Lakers, the Bucks, the Celtics, the Nets, the Blazers, the Sixers, the Spurs, the Suns, and the Kings to end the week. Or to end your fantasy week anyway. Front and back loading, Denver, Dallas, Toronto, OKC, Minnesota, and the Pelicans have 3 games in the first 4 days of the week. Now, the 5-game teams are in there, obviously, but say someone like a Denver who plays, what do they play this week? They play 4 games this week, the Nuggets, as nearly every team does, but 3 games are done by Thursday, so there's only 1 for them in the back half of the week. In the front half of the week, minimum anyone plays is 2, which is interesting. Back end, Dallas, Milwaukee, Brooklyn, Houston, OKC, and Toronto, 3 games in 4 nights to end the week, but the Clippers and the Knicks, just the 1 game there. Just the 1 game in the last 4 days of the week. So your fringe guys, maybe it's Rowan Barrett, quickly. Reggie Bullock, who's been providing value. Maybe it's Nerlens Noel. Zubats, Jackson, maybe then, with 1 game in 4 nights, you drop those players at the back end of the week. Let's look at some players to add in weekly leagues. Categories, Delon Wright, De'Aaron Fox is out all week. Tyrese Halliburton, I think, will start at point guard, but Delon's minutes are going to go up. He's a great add. Ken Birch, now this is where it's important. Those 3 quality games mean jack shit in a weekly league. The 5 games that Birch plays overall with no Boucher, and I don't think he'll rest any games. Super valuable in a weekly league. Tony Bradley's 5 games similarly, and then Facu Campazzo. No Monty Morris, no Jamal Murray, and now no Will Barton, so big opportunity for Facu. Players to sit, Zubats. Dort is an option. I think he only plays 3 of the 5 games. They've been sitting him on back-to-backs, so that's why I've got him there with a question mark. I don't know that they play him just the 3 games next week, but I think it's a huge possibility. Kobe White, because Zach LaVine will return, and then the depressed penis Sadiq Bey, just the 3 games for the Pistons. For points leagues, Baisley is a strong ad, Birch, Pokuševski, and Brunson, all 5-game players for the week, while players to sit, RJ Barrett, Montrezl Harrell, Kobe White, and Enes Kanter. And if we look at players who are likely to return from injury during the week, Donovan Mitchell, the skater boy Zach LaVine, the fun guy Kawhi Leonard.
I'm a fun guy.
And lastly, the rock DJ, Robbie Williams, all likely to return this week, guys. Don't forget, you can check our schedule analyzer. I've dropped a link to that in the description on YouTube on Basketball Monster. Don't forget, good luck, but also follow this podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and on Odyssey. While on YouTube, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, hit the thumbs up, and leave your comments down below, guys. We are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.